Jonathan, what's up, man? Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me, man.
Yeah, I've been excited about it because when I see a guy who's got courage and is willing to make a stand quite literally for things he believes in, knowing that there's going to be backlash and there's going to be challenges, it's unfortunately quite a rarity these days, it seems like.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you, and I appreciate it. So I'm happy to be here, man.
Yeah, and really, I think what outside of your basketball career, which I do want to get into a little bit, really what brought you into a lot of the cultural limelight, if you will, is in 2020, standing up, for the national anthem, right? When everybody else was taking a knee, and that was expected, and you were quote unquote supposed to do that, and yet you made the decision not to do that. So I'd love to hear about that story and why you made that decision, and then we can get into maybe some of the backlash and the fallout and all the things that came from that.
Yeah, for sure, man. It was just such a crazy time. And so to your point, it was like to everybody and even to myself, I was just a basketball player. I had been a Christian since my rookie year in the NBA, really became a Christian my rookie year in the NBA. I had grew up in the faith, but it wasn't something that was real to me or tangible. It wasn't until my rookie year when I really was like, I really want Jesus to be Lord of my life. And I started to take steps and getting him, first in my life. And then I saw myself grow over time and over time, having the right people in my life, my pastor, my wife of today, my church family, all those different things. I could see myself changing from the individual that I used to be. I struggled with anxiety a ton when I was a kid. The book that I wrote, Why I Stand, it's behind me. It really does take you on the journey of this kid who is plagued with anxiety, fear, and self-insecurity. But on the flip side, grows into this amazing basketball player. And he's going through how to balance that, really struggling with love and rejection and all those different things. So it really does take you on that story. But for the most part, I was just a Christian basketball player in the league that not necessarily everybody knew about. But of course, people in Orlando or, a lot of people around the world knew of me just from basketball, but nothing on like the cultural space. And so you have this crazy, tragic moment of George Floyd's death. And then, the world is on fire, almost literally, pretty much literally.
Right.
Everyone is going around with their version of what is the right thing to do. You have the rise of the Black Lives Matter organization, and they're at the forefront of this is what needs to be done. This is what white people need to do. This is what Black people need to do. And everyone needs to kowtow to whatever they say. And if you cross any lines, you're racist or you don't care about Black people. And so in the moment for me, it was like stepping back. What is the right way for me to respond in this moment that is authentic to myself? I didn't want to go along with anybody's narrative. I didn't want to just jump into a fight that I didn't fully understand. I wanted to know, where is the Black Lives Matter organization coming from? Logically, ethically, who are they? What do they exactly represent? And what is the way that I feel comfortable in going about this thing, or even if I need to speak at all? And during the time, it was during the riots that I was at church, and our pastor preached about the story when Jesus is about to be captured by the Roman guard, and how Peter lunges forward and chops off the guard's ear. And, as humans, that would be our natural reaction. Someone we love, take it the Black community, something that we love is at threat or it's some way of being offended. And our initial response is to fight. And Jesus says that if you live by the sword, you'll die by the sword. And I started to think about, can I step into this moment in a way that won't just perpetuate the fight that has been going on forever, white versus Black, man versus man. And so I said, you know what, I want to choose to love. And so we get into the NBA bubble, the NBA season starting again. And there's talks about all of the NBA players, the staff, the referees, all kneeling for the national anthem. And I was thinking to myself, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go along with somebody's narrative. I want my stance to be authentic to me. And what I started to think about is that, man, we all fall short of God's glory. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things that are wrong. And if we're going to be throwing stones, we're throwing stones from a glass house. And so I just wanted to take the opportunity to remind people of that if we could choose to love each other the way that God loves us, which is in spite of our sin, in spite of our shortcomings, then we could see real change in this moment, because it was a tragedy and it was something that was wrong. But it's so easy to point fingers. It's so easy to think that your stuff doesn't stink. And because of this tragic moment, a lot of people had that moral high ground where it's like, okay, because this happened to Black people, we now can go on the assault and get whatever we want out of the situation. And so I'm in the bubble. and I'm thinking about it, and we have a team meeting the day before we play. And, the team officials come in and they say, hey, we're going to leave this decision up to you guys. A team had already knelt the day of. And so, kind of the pressure was on. And so we get into the meeting, all the team officials leave, and it's just the players. And everybody's like, yo, this is a no-brainer. We don't have a choice. Everyone has to kneel. It's just the way that it is. And one of my teammates turned towards me and said, Jonathan, what are you going to do? And I said, fellas, I'm not kneeling and I'm not putting that t-shirt on. And then everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is going to be awful. We leave the meeting, and I'm still just thinking about what it is that how I'm going to go about it. And I was on the phone with my pastor that night. We were going to play the next day. And I'm telling him, I don't think you understand how crazy this is going to be. I'm going to be a coon. I'm going to be an Uncle Tom. I hadn't signed my contract extension yet. That was still up in the air. So there was room, at least, for there to be, people get canceled all the time for not going along with the crowd. And so there was that fear. But he said to me, you cannot stand for God and God not stand for you. And that's the thing about the whole thing. It wasn't so much me standing for what I thought that I believed in and what I felt. I really had the sense to say, you know what, God, I really do feel like this is your heart posture. Not that there isn't right and wrong on both sides, but ultimately, if we can love through it, then, you can't beat evil with evil. You can't beat hate with hate. You can only beat it with love. And so I went through with it. The next day we got to the moment, and everybody, knelt down, and I was just praying to myself, like, God, like, let my motives be pure. I don't want this thing to be about me. And then after the game, I got thrust through with all the questions, and I just tried my best to answer as best as I could. But that was the heartbeat behind it. I do believe that the love, I would say that I do believe that the antidote for the times that we're in, because racism and all the things that plague our society are heart issues. When it comes to men. And so an organization, a movement, a political party, they're not going to change the hearts of men. It has to be the gospel where we can look at ourselves and say, you know what, I've done wrong too, and humble ourselves. And so that's how I went about.
Man, that's a crazy story. It sounds like your motives are pure. I believe that, obviously. How did you reconcile knowing that it was going to create a lot of contention? Because we also know that contention is not of God, right? So you knew that it was, I assume you knew that it was going to create contention. If you didn't before, you certainly knew in that team meeting. And so how do you reconcile knowing that it is going to create contention? People are going to be upset, and it's going to create a lot of problems, not just for you, but just generally, it's going to create a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think the way that I thought about it was that this is going to open up room for conversation. And that's really all I wanted. After I had stood, the next day, we can get into this a little later, but we had the players called a player only meeting after I stood. And, a couple of the guys were going at me about my decision and everything like that. And what I said to them was like, guys, I see what you guys see. I'm not negating, that George Floyd died tragically and wrongfully. I'm not debating that. I see what you see. I just have a different answer. And so I think in trying to I'm not trying to drum up, confrontation or to make anyone angry. I'm just saying this is what I perceive to be true. The same way that, I respected you guys' stance in kneeling, I asked for that same respect in return. And so that's how we were able to leave out of that meeting.
What was the response? It sounds like beforehand, there was a lot of frustration, maybe to put it mildly, around your decision. What was the response after you talked with the guys, and of course after you stood up, from the guys, as you explained, here's my motives, here's why I'm doing this, here's the answer that I see? Were they respectful of that? Was there any fallout with players, friends, that sort of thing?
Well, it was just definitely divided. It was divided, and I understand why, because it was a highly emotional time, and I don't want to negate the power of media, the power of groupthink, in the way that things get to move in our country, the power of politicization. And so I understood that guys cared, and as they should, they cared about what was going on in the Black community and how they could best serve to help it. Again, it was me just saying, hey guys, I think that this is the right answer for me. I believe that the love of Jesus Christ is going to be the thing that changes the world. I know it's hard. Who wants to love their enemies? Who wants to love their neighbor when they've been wronged? But I believe it is the thing that's going to help us to come together in time. And so, some guys were, absolutely, upset at me, and I understood it. And I've been able to have conversations over time. Some of the same guys that, were really upset in the bubble, a year down the line, we could sit down and have a conversation. And one of my teammates even asked me, we were sitting down for breakfast, and he said to me, would you do anything differently now that you get a chance to look back? And I was like, honestly, bro, no, I wouldn't. I like the fact that we were able to have conversations. I knew it was a heated moment, but I still believe what I believe. And I asked him the same question right back. And he said, yeah. He said, I would. He said, honestly, I kind of fell into the movement. I fell into the hype of it all. And now, as time has passed, you see where the Black Lives Matter organization is at, some of the things that have come out about the way that they spent funds and all those different things. Not trying to, bash them or anything, but, people were able to say, maybe that wasn't the right way to go about the situation. And because it was such a, highly emotional situation.
Yeah. And I think those highly emotional situations require restraint, require control. And if it's a good decision now, then it's going to be a good decision tomorrow or the next day or the next day. I remember to a lesser degree, I can't remember the date, but where everybody posted the black square on their Instagram or their social media profiles. And I didn't do that because I didn't even know what that meant. I'm like, what is this supposed to mean? And everybody had a different thought and a different interpretation of this. And so I didn't post that little black square. And man, I had people blowing up my inbox and telling me like, oh, I can't believe you do this and you're racist and you don't care about this stuff. And I'm like, whoa. That stuff's important to me, but I want to make sure that if I'm going to put something that has my endorsement on it, that I know what in the world it is that I'm saying. Otherwise, I mean, what kind of spine do I have?
Yeah, honestly, a lot of that stuff, as hard it is to say, a part of it is the control piece, where it's like, this is what we set as the way to mourn for what happened or the way to pay tribute to what happened. And if we can get as many people, almost literally to force them to do this, then we have a level of power in it. And part of the reason why I did disagree with the entire thing, with the NBA was that it wasn't a choice. It felt like a demand. The way they staged it was, we're doing this in symbolism for the support of Black Lives Matter and what's happening in our country. But for me and a lot of the other players and, a lot of other people, it felt like a command. They didn't go about it in that way. So a lot of the things with the Black Lives Matter movement, it was like, you either do this or you're racist. If you are wearing the t-shirt and you are kneeling, you're for the cause, whether you are racist in your personal life or not. But if you don't have it on, then you are racist. Absolutely. There is no other way to support Black lives than to do what we say. And I was like, man, my life has been supported by the gospel. I've seen plenty other lives supported by the gospel, and I'm not going to, almost, kneel to your demands.
Yeah. And it's interesting how those demands come about. Obviously I wasn't there and I don't have the familiarity that you do, but it's a form of cultural extortion maybe, or blackmail. I'm not really quite sure how to put it, but
I think I can see where you're going.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like culturally, there's so many ramifications for doing that, and societally, and just the peer pressure of it, that maybe they weren't, they didn't have a gun to your head necessarily, but man, there's some real world consequences, even just being ostracized from your brothers, the guys on your team, your players. You guys got to work together on a daily basis. Man, that's some huge pressure that I don't think a lot of people, even myself, like, I have to ask, would I be willing to do that? I would like to think I would, but you don't really know until you're tested.
Yeah, for sure. And that's part of the reason why I think that it had to happen. And even more so that I had to write a book about it, because it's not even so much that I stood and yeah, it was a courageous moment, all that. And everybody says that it was cool. For me personally, it was the indication that I had grown to a place to where I was comfortable with standing up for what I believed in, because in my past, I wouldn't have been able to. And so when I say that I was struggling with anxiety, like my freshman year at Florida State, I am the #1 player in the state of Florida, basketball wise, and I'm taking anxiety medication just to practice and to play. Nobody knows about it. One of my teammates know, one trainer knows, and one coach knows. My family doesn't know, my friends don't know, but I'm struggling internally with being able to live up to, being big man on campus. And I'm really struggling. I had a, episode of having a panic attack and passing out in my study hall. And so I would not have been the guy who would have said, I care so deeply about a matter that I'm willing to stand up and then stand alone. And so for me, it was just a reassurance that the transformational, the transformation that happens, in a relationship with Christ is real and it's powerful. And I could see that in, my present day life. And that's why I think, the book was necessary. And for people to say, you know what, God is no respecter of persons. And this guy isn't some special individual that just has so much courage. He's not, because you could read the story and see all the things that he went through and how he struggled and how he, collapsed under fear so many times. But today he is someone who is willing to do it. So I can too.
Man, I have so much I want to unpack there. You said something interesting about the big man on campus. And I think a lot of people who are tuning into this podcast would look at somebody like yourself or other successful people that we've had on and think, man, that guy's got it all, right? He's got the life, he's got the job, he's got the notoriety, he's got the income. And then somebody like you says, man, I had all of this anxiety, or somebody else says I was dealing with difficult issues in my relationship or dealing with addiction. And I think people have a hard time understanding how much pressure comes from being good and wanting to be the best, and then having some level of success and the pressure and demands that come with that a lot of people just don't experience.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think at the base level, we are all human. And so I try my best to, even when I'm looking at somebody that, on the outside has it all together, has what everybody seems like they want. I know people and I know us as humans, and that we all struggle in several ways, with our own mentality, with our own, reassuring ourselves in any way. And for me, the key for me was finding my identity in Christ. For so long, I found my identity in basketball, where it was like the only thing that was good about me was what I could do on a basketball court. And so I never wanted to mess up. If I did mess up, then the love that I had gained and the attention that I had gained would be taken from me. And so many people, part of the reason why they're good at what they do is because they stress so hard about being good at what they do, so they can be accepted and liked and loved by other people. And as soon as you take that away, then who are they and what do they really have? And so for me, that struggle of anxiety up and down was like, I know that I'm talented, but I don't want to mess up. I don't want to fail because I don't want to lose what I've gained. And when I was able to really take a step back, and again, through the mentorship of my pastor at Jump Ministries Global Church that I go to now, but just like being able to walk through and like, God loves me for me. And I was so used to working on the basketball court for love or for attention, where it was like, God loves me for me, and I can finally breathe and find my identity in what he says about me, not what the world says about me. And I think that as people who are successful, the more that we can find our identity outside of what makes us successful, outside of what we do, the more relatable and the more real we can be, and not just flex what we have or what we do as our value.
I'm taking notes here. You said finding identity outside of what you do.
Right. What makes you successful in the world's eyes?
So you said you grew up in the faith, but you didn't always believe. And it wasn't until was it your rookie year? Is that what you said? Where did something happen during that time, or
yeah,
what?
for sure. And
what happened?
It's an interesting story. So I grew up in Bronx, New York. My dad was like super Christian. Like we were in church all the time, a Baptist Pentecostal church in New York, but it was just traditional, right? Like he tried his best to really instill in us the principles and the seeds of faith and trusting God and doing right. But the traditional form of going to church and singing songs, that's all it was for me. It wasn't something that was like, this is tangibly real. I believe in a risen Savior that died for my sins, and I want him to be Lord of my life so he can lead me and guide me into who he created me to be. That's where I am now, but that's not where I was before. And so when I was able to latch on to basketball, so this is important too. So my parents split up when I was about 10 years old, and I moved from Bronx, New York to Naples, Florida. And so I left like a Black community to a predominantly white community. And that's really where my anxiety started. I wasn't an anxious kid in New York, but once I got to Naples, I really struggled with fitting in. And I had, detailed in the book. Yeah, detailed in the book, there's a couple stories of just like how terribly I failed at fitting in. One time in New York, it was all about horseplay. Like that's how you made friends. In the Bronx growing up, you fight with a kid, you mess with them, y'all friends the next day. Like that's how it works. When I got to Naples, I would grab kids by the ankles and drag them. I was bigger than everybody else, but that was my form of like, I'm a playful kid, like play with me. And a few days later, I tried to do it again, and the security guard was waiting for me. Like they set me up, and I'm in the principal's office, and they call my mom, and the principal is like seriously concerned about the well-being of the students. And my mom is like, he's just a kid, like he just came from New York, you just got to cut him some slack. And that was the first time that I really became self-aware, where I was like, I messed up. Like these kids don't like me, and I'm gonna have to try another thing to fit in. And so I was the class clown. I was all these different things trying to gain the acceptance of my peers. My nickname was Ethiopia because I was so skinny and tall and dark. And so that made me struggle as well. But then I found basketball. And the more I put into basketball, the more, the guys wanted to hang with me. The girls started to like me because of the basketball player that I was. So I put everything into it. And then I still had that fear of the little kid Jonathan that wasn't accepted. And so I never wanted to mess up on the basketball court because I'd lose. I felt like I'd lose the love and the attention of the people who came to me because of basketball. And so I'm living my life. I have this picture in my head of what a man is. And so that's the money, that's the car, that's the women. And so that's what I'm chasing. Honestly, I make it to the NBA. I'm the 6th pick in the NBA draft, and I get to Orlando and I'm living my life. But I have these moments of unfulfillment. I remember one time I was coming home from the club, and I get home and I look myself in my bathroom mirror and I'm like, what are you doing? I was almost trying to have a good time. It wasn't something that was easy or instinctual. I was forcing myself to become something that I just wasn't. And so I had these little moments of unfulfillment and realizing that, man, all this thing isn't as much as it's not as cracked up as it is to be. And then the season starts and a teammate invites me to a chapel. We have chapel like 60 minutes before every game. And I go to the chapel and the chaplain says, we're going to go over this verse, Luke 6:46. And the verse says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? And the verse hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh man, I was like, that's me. Like, because even though I had those seeds from growing up, so if I was playing bad, I would listen to Christian music until I started playing well again. And then I go back to the regular music. I went to church, from here and there, but it wasn't something that was really consistent. And so I had these moments of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If things were going bad in my life, I knew where to revert to faith in order to help me get back. And then I just, forget it all. And so I was like, man, that's me. I'm the one who says, Lord, Lord, and doesn't honestly care about what Jesus has to say. So the verse just stuck with me, and it stuck with me so much to the point where I was like, you know what? I'm going to figure this thing out for myself. It's either I'm going to be a Christian and I'm going to be committed, or I'm not. And I'm going to drop the label altogether, because even during that time, if someone had asked me if I was a Christian, I would have said, yeah. I would have said, right. Yeah, sure. Even though I wasn't living that way. And so I went on this binge of like Christian apologetics. So that's all of the arguments in the defense for the faith, the Kalam cosmological argument, the moral argument, all these different things. And I'm listening to John Lennox, William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Ravi Zacharias. I even signed up for a Biola University course. It's like an apologetics university. So I was in, and I really started to entertain that there could be a real God. I wasn't all the way there in terms of like, putting my faith in Jesus all the way, but I was like, there could be a God based on these arguments. And then this is where something happens. I'm on an elevator one day. It's my rookie year. I'm sorry if this is a long story.
No, it's good. I love hearing about it.
It's my rookie year, and I'm on the elevator, and I'm about to get on the elevator, and a gentleman walks up. He's about to get on the elevator too. So I assume he lived in the building, and he stopped me and he said, "I can tell you how to be great." And I said, "How?" He said, "You have to know Jesus." And I was like, man, I know Jesus. I'm a Christian, but I just played it off. And then I kept running into the guy. I run into him. I hadn't seen him before. I just started running to him like in the front of the building, parking garage, elevator. And he would always ask me to go to lunch with him. And I was like, honestly, I didn't want to go to lunch with him. Part of my like anxiety was that I didn't want anybody to get close to me. And so I walked around with like a guard up. And so this guy's asking me to go to lunch with him. I'm like, there's no way, and so finally I see him so many times that I'm like, look, guy, if I see you one more time, I'll go to lunch with you. I see him again. I drop what I'm doing right there. I'm like, we're going to lunch right now. We go to lunch, we exchange numbers, we get to lunch, and it was just a casual conversation. You know, we talked about God a little bit, but not necessarily. It was more so just getting to know me and me getting to know him. I leave the lunch and I delete his number from my phone. And so I'm like, I don't have to see you anymore. So I don't see him anymore. And then the upcoming weekend, a friend of mine, he was my trainer back in Naples, my high school trainer, invites me to go to the movies with him and his wife. He's in town. We go to see a Christian film. It gets better. And the Christian film is terrible. We leave the Christian film halfway through. That's important for timing wise. We leave the Christian film halfway through and we go watch Thor. We go to watch Thor, finish Thor. It's like a 3-hour movie. And we're sitting outside the movie theater and he's like, man, where are you at with God? And I'm like, yeah, honestly, I don't know. Like I'm reading, I'm researching. I don't really know. And he says, look, if you keep knocking, you keep asking, you'll find. And I'm pulling out of the movie theater and I'm pulling onto the street. I'm making a right turn. Then there's a car making a left turn on the opposite lane that way. And I look out the window as our cars are passing and I stop my car. And then that car stops its car. And I roll down my window and it's the guy from the elevator.
Really?
And it's like 11:30 at night. And I said to myself, yo, God wants this guy in my life. I don't know what this is. And so we laugh, you know, and then we leave. I tell him, look, you and me breakfast tomorrow. We go to breakfast the next morning. And I'm telling him about this idea that I had. And I was reading in the Bible about how whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. So I was going to buy a bunch of burgers from McDonald's and pass it out to the homeless. I'm telling him this. And he says, you can't do that. And I'm like, why not? He's like, if you're going to feed people, you have to feed people right. And so he's like, he has a catering company that feeds prisons. And so he's like, if you buy the food, I'll have my people cook it and we'll really do something for the homeless the right way. So I'm like, sure. Okay. So I'm following him to Sam's Club. And I'm saying to myself the whole time, what are you doing? You don't even know who this guy is. And then I said to myself in the car, something about this feels right. So I follow him, I buy the food, I give it to him. Some people come pick it up. And the next weekend I get a text with an address. Fast forward it, I go to the address. There's a line of like 200 homeless people outside of this plaza. I jump in line, I put my hairnet on. There's a beautiful young lady next to me serving food who is now my wife today.
Wow.
So I'm serving food. We have a great time. And something about it stuck with me. I was like, and I was thinking to myself, God loves me. And I don't know exactly why I was thinking about this, but it was like someone was ordering my footsteps outside of my control. And it was the first time that I kind of like dropped my shoulders because I was so used to being so tense and anxious where I dropped my shoulders and I said, God loves me. And someone's looking out for me. And that night I got on my knees for the first time at my bed that I had the entire time I was in Orlando. And I remember the youth group prayer, Jesus, be Lord of my life, come into my heart. And then I started to hang out with that friend a lot more. His name was Doc. And he invites me to church. I say, look, if you're cool, your pastor has to be cool. I'll go. I go to church. They introduce the pastor and his Doc.
Oh, really?
And so I've been going to the church now for like 5 years. I married the young lady that was next to me in line. She was already attending the church. We've been married going on a year now on September 18th. And we haven't looked back.
Congrats on your marriage, man. That's exciting. Story. No, it's awesome. I loved hearing that. It's a very powerful testament to your relationship with God and walking in his steps, and that Pastor Doc being in your life, and then meeting your wife like that. That's divine, man. That's no way that's coincidence at all. That's right. Divine intervention.
And that was the thing that really got my attention, where it was like I could pinpoint that it wasn't of my own, volition. And it was like, man, somebody's out there looking out for me. And I don't think it's just a coincidence.
Where do you suggest that somebody start on this path? Because there's a lot of men, myself included, who's trying to find this spiritual journey for myself. I've always been faithful. I've always been religious even.
Right.
But still kind of feel like I've just been dabbling my toe in the water, maybe much like you did. So where does a guy actually start this real journey to discovering and uncovering this for himself?
Yeah, man. So there's a verse that says, taste and see that the Lord is good. And so for me, especially growing up, there was so much that I always felt like God was trying to take something from me. right? The fun, the life that everyone else is living out here, the party scene, all those different things. I'm like, God is trying to take something from me. But the minute that I said, you know what, I want to know if this thing is real, and I dove in, I found that he wasn't trying to take anything from me. He was trying to get something to me. And so the realization that God really is a good father, and he wants the best for you, and he has a plan and a destiny for your life that crazily supersedes whatever you think is good for you, that the world has to offer. And the more that I've been able to dive into it, the more that I've seen the blessings of it. I've seen the transformation and growth inside of myself. I've seen where I need help. I've seen my own shortcomings and lackings, and how God has helped me to work through that. And so I would just encourage anybody to continue to try. When I I was having a conversation with a guy the other day, and he asked me, like, how do you begin to put God first in your life? And how do you know that you're doing that? And what I told him was that for me, it all starts with a decision. At the end of the day, we have to choose. But for me, it was slow, but I could tell that my heart was changing when it was like, I had these two options in front of me, and in past, my first option would have been easily gone in the other direction, but there was something inside of me that said, you know what, I may not want to do that, and I may want to go the other way. And I started to see my choices change, my instincts change, where I was like, not perfection, but my heartbeat was being toward wanting to please God. And so finding out what he likes, finding out what honors God, and trying my best to do that in my life. And I could start to see myself change, myself get better. And then obviously getting into a real local church where you're around other believers. You can be encouraged, you can encourage other believers, but steadily getting that word inside of yourself, inside of your spirit, to where you're identifying with what the pastor is saying and growing in that way. There is no perfect church. I have to say that, because there are no perfect people. My pastor always says, if you find a perfect church, don't go, because you'll mess it up. And so, so yes, I would say definitely slowly but surely, but at the end of the day, it's a choice. We all make choices. We all choose, and you can choose to say, you know what, God, I want you. I want you to be first in my life. I want to do this thing the right way, the real way. And then you walk down that path. You go to church. You ask questions. How do I become a believer? Confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. Get baptized as a symbol to the world that you're a believer. All of that is important, and all of that, will get you on your journey.
You said something really interesting a bit ago when you were talking about that moment where you decided to stand amongst your teammates, and you said that you wanted to choose love, and you tied it into the love that Christ has for us and for you, and you wanted to express that love. How was you making a stand in that moment a symbolism of love? Like, how did you connect those dots?
So I would say it wasn't necessarily the stand that was, to me, that was love. It was the message that was love. I felt that standing was the right thing for me to do. And the reason behind it was that I didn't want to bash the other side. I felt like the tone and the rhetoric of the Black Lives Matter movement and organization was not right. I don't think it was fruitful for the coming together of Black and white people. And so I didn't want to go along with what they were doing. I wanted to do what, we normally do. We stand for the national anthem. I love this country. This is what I want to do. But my message behind it was that of love, is that I'm not bashing white people. I'm not against white people, because I've made mistakes in my own life. Yes, what happened to George Floyd was tragic and wrong. And Derek Chauvin, should be, punished for it. But at the end of the day, if I was in his shoes, I would want mercy. I would want somebody to say, you're not an evil person. You made a mistake, or whatever someone would say about me. I would want that. And so because I would want that, I would want to give that to somebody else. And so that was the message of love that I was trying to get across, not necessarily in standing.
That makes sense. That makes sense. What has been your own personal experience with racism? I know when you said you moved to Florida, you probably experienced it more so than you did in New York, I imagine. What was that like as a young kid, and how did you confront that, and how did you deal with that? I mean, even with your nickname, obviously racism is something that exists, but I'm very curious how you dealt with it.
Yeah, no, it was hard, and it was something that I didn't fully understand, because in the Bronx, we were all Black. We were all Black,
Right.
and
Right.
and there wasn't, you never really heard that, a term or anything like that negatively, or exactly towards you. It was a term of endearment. We would mess around with each other, call each other that word.
Sure.
And when I got to Naples, and then obviously my nickname was Ethiopia, there was an incident in class where there was this student, this guy, I forget his name, but I was one of the only Black kids in the class. And he actually had said the N-word out loud, directed towards me, and the teacher yelled at him. But that was really all that happened. And so it was tough for me. I really did seclude into like the shell of myself, like trying not to step on anybody's toes or make anybody angry, because I felt like that would be the route that they would take in terms of, an action back towards me. And so it was difficult. I think where my understanding has come from, again, is that racism is real. I'm not saying that racism doesn't exist, but I know that it's a heart issue. I know that it's something that's learned. I don't, the same way that I wouldn't, what's the word I'm looking for? Judge people for something that I've seen. Or when people come into church, my job isn't to judge them. My job is to love them where they're at and let the Holy Spirit do its job. And so when I see somebody who is racist, my initial reaction isn't to judge them. My initial reaction is to understand that it's a heart issue and it's something that they have to work out with God. But I know what does change people. And so again, that moment of why are you standing when everyone is kneeling in support of racism is because, and against racism, is because I know what truly does heal racism. And it is a heart change of a human being. And that doesn't happen by a protest.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree with that. Because protests are inflammatory, but by design, right? They're supposed to be confrontational and contentious. And then they tend to escalate at times. But, you think about conversations like this, where men and women are sitting down one-to-one, trying to figure each other out and trying to understand this is where it comes from. And so, you might have a foot on me and you might be darker skinned than I am, but really I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm dealing with the same stuff he was dealing with. And there's that commonality that brings us together.
And even to that point, so much of today's day, Twitter and social media and how everything has become so politicized, and it's almost like getting rid of the conversation. I don't have to see you as a human being if I can see you as a term, as a racist, as a what we call it, a xenophobe or whatever, a transphobe. I don't have to see you as an individual. I don't have to know what you've been through, know what you've walked through. I can just label you as that term. And because that term is so, heightened and evil in so many people's eye, I'm justified in my reactions towards you. Where if even somebody who was those things was able to sit down with another human being and have a conversation, it would humanize them. If they were able to hear where they came from or what they learned when they were a kid or what they went through, it would humanize the individual in a way that you wouldn't be able to just label them and dismiss them. And so I think that to your point, when we are able to sit down and have conversations, and that's almost exactly what the opposite of protests do at times, because the message can get lost in the vastness of what you're shooting for, what you're aiming for to get done. And so yeah.
I even think with protests, you have, and I think a lot of protest type situations can be with the right motives, but then you have other actors come in, whether they're ignorant or bad actors come in and they're not there for the right reasons. And then the message or the original objective or goal is lost through corruption and ignorance. And it just turns into this big show that doesn't produce any sort of results.
I agree. And I even saw that happen a couple of times with the Black Lives Matter movement, where, people showed up for one reason and other bad actors came in and wanted to burn things down and go about it in a negative way.
Yeah. So it's interesting with your career, because the last couple seasons you've been out with an injury, right? So yeah. It's interesting because I don't want to put words in your mouth at all, of course, but I imagine that if you had injuries, maybe your rookie year, it would have been harder for you because you did wrap up your identity in being a basketball player. But what's that like now, where you can't play, but you also have this faith that you've wrapped up your identity in? Is that been easier to manage injuries and these sorts of things, or how does that look?
It's definitely been easier to manage injuries. At the end of the day, I believe that God has a plan for my life. And so when negative things do happen, I do have hope and I do have somewhere to run to find faith and find encouragement. I have, in my opinion, the right people around me that were able to help walk me through my ACL injury. And so they were able to keep me uplifted and just keep me encouraged. And even throughout the process of writing the book, I wouldn't have been able to write the book if I didn't get injured. And so a part of that was like, I still feel like God is doing something with me in my life so I can be a light and an encouragement to other people outside of the court. Yes, I love basketball. Yes, I want to get back, and I'm so excited for this upcoming season. But I found purpose and destiny in, living for him and writing the book and hearing how people are inspired by it. It wouldn't have come to pass if I didn't get injured. So a lot of times we see things at kind of this face-on level, but God sees it from a bird's eye view, and can see the end from the beginning, and He knows why. And even being able to identify with other players that get injured. It wasn't something that I would have been able to do, in my earlier years. And now when I see a guy go down, I have a different respect. I have a different, empathy and heartbeat for him, where I can talk to him in a way that somebody else who hasn't gone through a major injury can't. Yeah.
Has there ever been a moment, whether it's through your injury or any other factor in life, where you've thought to yourself, hey, God, like, I have this plan
Yo,
and your plan is not aligning with my plan here.
100%. I'm not going to sit here and say I was not frustrated. I wasn't angry. I cried my eyes out. When I found out that it was my ACL, I was angry. But you got to go back to God, and ultimately He has the answer for it. And so, it was tough. I had my plan. I was having my best season that I had so far. I was leading the league in blocks. And so I was having a great year, and it was going to be my, my contract extension year, and I ended up tearing my ACL. So, but again, being able to take a step back and say, God, what do you have? What is going on? And then to have this process of writing a book and seeing, where I came from and being able to put it on paper to where I am now, I'm like, I can understand why this book needed to happen.
Do you have fears that with all the good that's been happening with you being sidelined because of that injury with the book and seeing things from a different perspective and having empathy, that getting back into the game is going to, I don't want to say mess with that, or keep you or get you distracted or keep you from what's really important?
No, I would say I know that my purpose, a part of my purpose is being a basketball player, and that's where I have, honestly, my a large sphere of influence, and I believe that I can do it in a way that honors and glorifies God, and I do believe that that's His plan for me. We don't necessarily know, but at the end of the day, that's what I do believe. So, like, coming back to the court, I don't necessarily see it as something that's distracting me from what I've been doing. I feel like I'm walking in my purpose, and I took this detour for the purpose of getting this book out and seeing that life at the end of the day is bigger than basketball, and God is bigger than basketball. But I do believe that basketball is a part of God's plan for me.
That's interesting, because I know you always hear people, oh, these guys, they're complaining, they're making millions of dollars and they're just playing a game, and they write it off. But it sounds like you take it pretty seriously, clearly. And it's a integral part of your path with God.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely take it seriously, and guys do too. I can understand some people's mindset in terms of, we probably shouldn't complain about the little things, and I wouldn't complain about the little things too, because of how great our game is and how big it is and how well we're compensated. But guys absolutely do take it serious, and definitely me, in believing that it's an integral part of my my purpose.
How did you begin to overcome some of the fears and insecurities that you had? I know you said, hey, I know that our Creator loves me for who I am, and so there's that acceptance. But are there some tactical things that you've done where you've begun to feel more assured and more confident in yourself, so you're not so wrapped up in trying to impress others or win their approval?
Yeah, face them, face the fears, little by little. When this is interesting. It's a dope part of the story too. About 2 months into me really giving my life to Christ, our pastor had called for me to preach. So this is like a Sunday service, me getting up in front of people and preaching, the same kid who was, passing out at Florida State because he was so anxious. But
Yeah.
now it was like, I believe that God is with me. I believe that God has called me to do this and I can do this, even though I was so terrified. I was so afraid. So he asked me to do it. And then he was like, I think you should invite your teammates. And I
Whoa.
was like, you're insane.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not doing that.
There's no way I'm doing that. Absolutely not. Hang it up. He said, only give me your answer after you really pray about it. And I was like, oh.
Why'd you have to say that to me?
And so I prayed about it and said, you know what? It's the right thing to do. And so this same guy who was at the club with them a few months ago is now going to them saying, hey, I'm going to be preaching this upcoming Sunday. I think you should come. And so, so it was these little moments of facing my fear and being able to trust God and knowing that he was with me. And then after you did what you were so afraid to do and you look around and you're still alive and you're still here, and it's like, oh, wow, I did it. I did it. And thank God that I did it. And then it was the next thing and the next thing and the next thing of these little incremental moments of facing my fear with God on my side, to where I was like, I can do this. I can fight my fear. I don't have to be afraid, because God is with me. And so all of those little things led up to the moment of being able to stand. The stand wasn't just I mustered the courage out of nowhere. It was absolutely built up over time. And I do believe that was in God's plan as well.
Have you had any sort of encounters with teammates or other people from your life who are openly critical about your path and the way that you went, specifically as it relates to your spirituality? And then how do you deal with that as you have criticism and people like, oh, I knew you when kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've definitely gotten a couple of those. Like, man, we was doing that. Well, you wasn't all Christian then.
Right.
But I've definitely had a couple of those. But people change and people grow, and what I've tried my best to do is go about my life as authentically and as humbly as I can. And so what I tell a lot of young people is I think about it like Instagram. Instagram is supposed to be a snapshot of your life, your interests, what you're into, all those different things. For me, I would not be authentic to myself if Christ wasn't a part of my everyday life, a part of my basketball, journey and all this. I wouldn't be authentic to myself because he is. And so I respect everyone's authentic self, and I just ask for that same respect in return. So that's honestly is a lot of my responses to those things, where it's like, I can understand if you don't agree with me. I can understand if you feel like Christianity has no part in basketball, or Christianity has no, I'm a basketball player, so I should never tweet about Christ. I should just tweet about basketball.
Yeah, I never, even with the political opinion and things like that, where it's like, just dribble, that kind of stuff. I'm like, I never understood that, because I know that I have a lane and I deviate from the lane, and I have opinions about other things that I'd like to talk about occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, so I just try to just do me, just stay in my lane and be authentic to myself. Yeah.
There's a scripture. I don't know if it's exactly right. I think it's Romans maybe 1:16, and I'm paraphrasing, but I think it talks about not being ashamed of the gospel of Christ.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been pondering on, because I don't really talk about my faith very much, or I haven't on the podcast and through the movement. And I did that by design originally, because I thought that we would be able to reach more people with a message that wasn't that didn't have that messaging in it as an underlying foundation. And I've wondered, like, is that really what I did, or am I ashamed of, maybe not even ashamed, but maybe I didn't even know what I believed, and so I didn't quite know how to share it or articulate it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely makes sense. I think that it doesn't make you a bad person, and not necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. But at the end of the day, it's where God is coming from in that verse, where it's like, how I think about it is, people need help. Like the people who you would never think need your help, or the people who you think aren't listening or would just brush it off, like, people need help, especially in today's day. People obviously with everything that's going on in the world, but a lot of people are just lost. They have no foundational ethos or moral compass about the way to live life, and they're drowning in what the world has to offer. And so I think that not even so much as a commandment to share about your faith and share about the things that God has done in your life, but just out of a necessity for the people that are listening to you. They need it. They absolutely need it. And so I think that there's obviously a balance and a way to go about it that is that's wise. But I would encourage you to, as you continue to, grow your podcast. I know it's at a great place right now, but continue to give people, your authentic self. And if you are a believer and you're continuing to go down that journey, you can't be authentic to yourself without it.
Well said. I mean, that's 100% true, and something I've been experiencing and thinking about for myself. Man, I got to tell you, I really appreciate your courage and your ability to stand by your convictions, not just in the things that you say, but the things that you do and how you live your life. Like it's very inspiring. For me, I see what you're doing. And I'm like, man, that's inspiring. Like I want to live like that. I want to be somebody who has conviction, and then I want to be able to stand by it and put it all on the line for those convictions. That's very powerful.
Well, look, I give God the glory again. Like I'm not the guy who could stand up here and say, oh yeah, that's just me. I did all this. I'm just this courageous guy who pulled it out of anywhere. I can't give it to anybody else but the people who have come along my journey. Like I said, Doc and all those other people who were there to minister to me in my weakness and saw me weak and still loved me in the same way that God does for me and does for everybody. I wouldn't be where I am today or the man I am today without it. So I appreciate that.
Is Doc still your pastor, or do you have a new pastor?
Yeah. No. He ordained me, and I speak from time to time in our church, not too much. But yeah, he's definitely still my pastor, my mentor. Like just, we're still going strong.
That's awesome. What, I was trying to wrap it up there, but I had another question as this came up. You're talking about your weaknesses and things you're working on. Are there things that in your life that you're currently working on that you feel are weaknesses that you would like to shore up and you're actively working to improve?
Oh yeah. It's man, the enemy is relentless, but in a sense that, we're always growing and we never really get past, anything. Not saying that you don't grow out of stuff, but it's the same things over and over again. Like I'll always have to fight fear, because I know what to say to myself to make me afraid. Even I know where to go in my own head to be
no doubt.
And so it's like I continually have to fight that with what I know and what I believe. So what I've learned is it's not that I've defeated fear, it's that I've learned how to fight it. And so the verses that are in the Bible, the one that says the righteous are as bold as lions and God has not given me a spirit of fear and he's with me. Those are the things that I recite to myself before games, as I'm going into another speaking engagement or something like this. What I say to myself before I get on a podcast with Ryan, that's how I fight my fear, because it's always there. It's always going to be something that rears its ugly head, but I've learned how to fight it. And so I think that that's something that I'm still fighting on a daily basis. I've definitely covered a lot of ground, but I still got a lot of ground to cover. Yeah. And then just growing as a married man, as a husband, something. Are you married?
I am. Yeah. 18 years.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say I'm on year 1, and so
that's good. It's a good place to be. It's a beautiful time.
Yeah, thank you, man. But yeah, just trying to grow every day, and that's something that it's obviously something that needs a lot of attention and makes you a better person, forces you to become a better person, or it all goes to rubbish. And so yeah.
Awesome. Well, how do the guys connect with you? Obviously, they can pick up a copy of the book wherever they want to get books, but how do they connect with you and learn more about what you're doing or follow your career and learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, you can check me out on Instagram, Twitter, Jonathan Isaac. I think my Instagram handle is JohnIsaac_01. I encourage everyone to really go grab a book. I think the best place to do it is Amazon. Why I stand on Amazon, and like you said, wherever books are at. And yeah, connect with me. And I'm so grateful to be on your podcast, man. And hopefully we can stay in touch.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really appreciate you. I'm glad you joined us. I know a lot of guys are going to get some value from this. So thanks for coming on, man.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.